Alright, let's roll. Left monitor. Timer. I feel like counting up doesn't make sense. The video's already going to count up. What I really need is something that counts down and beeps so I know when to stop the video and record another one. So, countdown timer. Oh, that's right. I do like the Torch browser, but not a fan of Yahoo search. Okay, so found a countdown timer, and we'll set it for 10 minutes, because supposedly the YouTube algorithm likes videos that are 10 minutes long, according to some reliable sources on the internet. I guess it's not like a bad thing to mention who my source is. That source would be Josh Fluke. He mentioned it in passing in a video. I think he's a pretty reliable person. Credible is what I mean to say. Alright, counting down. The goal today, I want to map one rectangle onto another. Specifically what I mean by that is I have one viewport and I want to scale the pixels on one viewport onto another. I might want to go from a larger rectangle to a smaller rectangle, or the other way around, a smaller rectangle to a bigger rectangle. I found this post on Stack Overflow. Technically this is Stack Exchange. I still consider it Stack Overflow. It's kind of like a subsection of Stack Overflow specifically for math. I did find a similar question also on the main Stack Overflow with more of a programming focus. Scrolling through here, I'm looking at this formula, and just by eyeballing it, it looks about right from what I did on some graph paper earlier. I'm actually not going to take it apart any more than just looking at it and going, oh, that looks about right, because I'm just going to take the formula that I have and use that and hope it works. Actually, I don't even have the formula right now. We're going to write that formula out. We're going to go through the steps. So anyways, why do I want to do this? So even though we're going to extract the problem out today as, mapping pixels from, one rectangle to another for, resizing, imagine that you have, some shader code, and one of these rectangles is a two-dimensional data set, and then the other rectangle is your viewport, and you're, sampling one data set and then, mapping it onto a viewport that does some transformations to that data to create whatever kinds of effects you're trying to create in the viewport. Okay, what else? So from this post, it looks like they are using... they're phrasing the problem in the type of terms that I like to use. Specifically, the rectangle is defined by a top left corner and a bottom left corner, which maybe you're like, well, what other way is there? Well, the other way would be a top left corner and a width and a height rather than point to point, right? So you can define a rectangle point to point, or you can define a rectangle with a top left origin and then a width and a height. There's probably plenty of other ways you can define it, but those are the two main ways you'll see rectangles defined. So let's go over to our left monitor really quick. Open up a new tab, and let's just make a rectangle class. So let's say, I'm using JavaScript by the way, so let's say function new rectangle, and it takes no arguments. And yes, I am mixing C code stuff with JavaScript because void does not exist in JavaScript. But C and JavaScript, strangely enough, are the two languages I do the most. So I will use, I guess, C idioms sometimes when I'm coding. Yeah, I mean, that's just the way I roll, so whatever. Okay, so our rectangle. So var rec, and we're just going to create a new object. And then within that object, we are going to have a and then do you want to define it like so there's different ways we could define this. I like to think of the rectangle in terms of left and right bounds and top and bottom bounds. Therefore, I group it like this, right? So here's our left and right bounds inclusive. Here's our top and bottom bounds inclusive, right? If you didn't like thinking of it that way, you know, you could always write your source code, you know, like this, where we have X and Y, and then we group the numbers together instead. So now we have top left and bottom right. I, for some reason, don't like to think of it like that, for some reason. I think why I don't like this grouping here is because I try to stick to a rule of general to specific. So the general part is X, and then the specific part is it the left bound or the right bound? And what the general part and the specific part is can be very arbitrary or very context sensitive. So it can be very hard to, you know, stick to that rule as you're writing code. Sometimes you'll find you'll want to flip terms in your variable names, but it's good to try to remain as consistent as possible, have some consistent rules of how you name variables. Because I'll tell you what, you're not going to remember all your source code, so you better have a consistent way of doing things so you know what your intentions were. Okay, anyway, so we got our left and right bounds and our bottom and top bounds. And then right after we create the object, we will do object.seal. And this is so we don't accidentally add properties to the object. For example, maybe we do this, right, instead of this. And we would like this one to, you know, throw an error if we, you know, screw that up. So usually in, well, you put a use strict up here to make sure that if we're doing anything wonky, the V8 engine will complain about it. Usually people will only use this once, but they'll put all of their source code inside like a big ify statement, and then they'll put the use strict at the top of that ify statement. Ify being an immediately invoked function expression. My thought on that is that's great to centralize things like that. And if I was less lazy, maybe I would do that. But I don't see any disadvantage of doing it like this, except now you're going to have to write in every single function, which is kind of tedious, but there's a pro to that, which is it's going to be a pain in the ass to remove this use strict if you put it in every single function. And you know what? I don't want to make it easy for people to run my code all loose and wild. So you know what? I'm perfectly fine with peppering use strict all over in my code. Okay, so we have this rectangle class. So you notice how I wrote this function description with new underscore rectangle rather than... So another way to write this would be like function rectangle. And if you wanted to be all like C# Java kind of style, you would do like... I mean, there's a lot of ways to do object-oriented JavaScript, but a way you could do this is you could have, you know, your private variables, where I usually like to do this, where I create a private variable container that's an underscore, private variables, and then what you could do is you could go underscore.x, let's just do it in a different format. Now let's keep the same It looks a little bit weird, but let's just keep this. We could do this. And then the same thing with Y, so we could cut this, paste this here. And then, you know, once we're done adding all of our private variables to the setup of the object, you know, same thing with the object.seal on our private variables. And then for our public functions, what we could do is, like, you know, this dot get x0, right? And then we could just say we could either inline the function, or what I really like to do is expose private functions publicly at will. Like, I use this kind of like a C header, where it's like it's a list of public functions at the top. Oh, let me stop recording and record another video.